The following program contains shockingly brilliant insights. If you suffer from a lack of dark sunglasses, Randall may not be right for you. Check with your optometrist.
Standing for truth in the four corners of America. Fighting for justice on the frontiers of the culture wars. And turning resistance into an art form. Randall Terry.
The U.S. has ensured that blood will be spilled, treasure sunk in war with Iran, unless something of historic proportion happens, and it's going to probably be led by Israel. Don't go away.
It's time now for Down Home with Granny Jihad.
Allah Takrapa. Children, come close. Muhammad said, I have been ordered to fight with the people till they say none has the right to be worshipped but Allah. Do you get the message?
Welcome to the broadcast. We will go over the news of what has happened with this historic mistake, as Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu calls it, with Iran and their nuclear program. But once we've dealt with the news, which you can get anywhere, I'm going to take you behind the scenes historically and ethically and militarily to show how this agreement, if it continues in the direction that it's going, will ensure the loss of life and the loss of treasure when war comes. Because if the path continues that is laid out before us, if Iran is allowed to continue having nuclear facilities, there is going to be war. All right, and by the way, that impacts you and me for a very simple reason. American blood will be shed. American treasure will be spent in the fight against Iran. All right, here's what we know. The Iranians have perhaps 17, 18, 20 different nuclear facilities. They have been steadily moving forward for years, enriching uranium to the level that it could be used for a bomb, or more importantly, a number of bombs. They have also been developing long-range missiles that could be used to carry a nuclear payload. They have said repeatedly that they have the desire to wipe Israel off the face of the map. Because they are Shiite Muslims who have a history from the dawn of Islam of fighting with Sunni Muslims, Saudi Arabia is very concerned. Remember, Iran are made up of Shiites who believe that you have to be a blood descendant of Muhammad to be the caliph, the leader of the Muslim world, whereas the Sunnis believe it could be any devout Muslim to be a legitimate leader. So this quarrel has been with Islam since the dawn of Islam, since the first generation of survivors after Muhammad's death. There have been bloody conflicts between the Shiites and the Sunnis, which is why Saudi Arabia is very concerned about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. The Iranians basically had their entire nuclear program legitimized because what we said was, okay, we're going to give you back the $6 billion. The U.S. is going to give back to Iran the $6 billion that it has been holding since the hostage crisis in the early or the late 70s under the Ayatollah Khomeini. They get to keep their uranium. All they have to do is dilute it. Now, I think that we all know that basically that means just add water. Dilute the uranium, but the problem is that they can undilute it later. What do you call that little machine where you take the moisture out of something? Dehydrator. Yeah, they just get a dehydrator and they, all right, I'm joking. But the fact of the matter is that in a matter of weeks, they can undilute their enriched uranium and keep going forward. This was a 6-month deal. They don't have to disassemble any of their nuclear enrichment plants. They don't have to give up any of their centrifuge equipment, which allows them to make a more and more refined uranium. As I said, they don't have to give up their uranium, and they don't have to stop developing and building long-range nuclear or long-range missiles. It's win, 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 win for them. It's so bad that the French call it a sucker's deal. Now, we all know that the French don't have much of a taste for war. But when the French tell you that this is a sucker's deal, you better sit up and take notice. Well, Israel has sat up and taken notice. Obama has been scolded by phone in a personal conversation with Netanyahu that's making a lot of news. But more importantly, Netanyahu has made it absolutely clear that Israel is prepared to go it alone. Lane, play these clips.
And Israel always reserves the right to defend itself by itself against any threat.
We cannot and will not allow a regime that calls for the destruction of Israel to obtain the means to achieve this goal. We will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapons capability.
And so there you have it. They will do what they must do, as they did on June the 7th in 1981. Do you remember what happened then? I'm going to talk about it when we come back from this break. And I'm also going to explain to you why people are comparing this disastrous deal with something that happened in Munich back in 1938. Don't go away. Do you want to have knowledge, wisdom, discernment? If so, you have to read good books on theology, history, books that look at the lives of great men and women. So to help you to become a more effective Christian, a better witness for truth, somebody who can engage in productive conversation that exhorts and edifies those that you speak with, we're going to do something crazy. We're offering you these 7 books for a gift of any size. You just pay for the shipping and handling, and then give whatever gift that you can, and we will send them to you. But just to make it a little bit more crazy, I will send you a second copy of my 3 books, autographed. You can give them as a gift to your pastor or to a family member and help extend truth and justice in the world. This is while supplies last. I think the question is, now that Iran is going to get that $6 billion from the U.S., are they going to tithe to Syria? Use a little bit of that money for terrorism against Israel and other states that Syria doesn't like. We'll keep you posted on that one. All right, Munich, September 29th, September 30th, 1938. Lane, play this footage so that people can see.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
All right, so you have Chamberlain saying that this was peace in our times, holding up the piece of paper, holding up the agreement. You see Churchill, or rather Chamberlain and Hitler signing this document that there would never again be war between the Germans and between the English. What happened, and I'm giving you this historical backdrop because history repeats itself when you don't learn the lessons. After World War I, people were just devastated at the loss of life in the trenches. And the Versailles Treaty basically locked in Germany so that Germany could never again cause a general war in Europe. And people were worn out from World War I. And someone asked me off camera while we were prepping, why are we doing this? Why are we even allowing this to happen? It's really simple. We're worn out. The American people, the English, other members of our coalition that we put together to go into Iraq in 91 and then again after 9/11 and then into Afghanistan, people are worn out. They're tired of war. And they're willing to take this sucker's deal with the blind, forlorn hope that it will prevent more bloodshed and more loss of treasure. This is exactly what happened in England. After World War I, people were worn out. They didn't want another war. And so when Chamberlain came back and said, we have peace in our times, people were like, yes, we believe you. We'll follow you. Anything but another war. And so they were willing to be fooled and deceived just so that they could hope that there would not be another conflict. The problem is this, that there were steps leading up to World War II that if you had ears to hear and eyes to see, like Winston Churchill did, you could see that the steps that they were taking and their failure to act was ensuring that there would be a war. Read the history for yourself. You'll weep. Churchill, in the mid-30s, invaded the Rhineland. It was a 30-mile strip of land between Germany and France that was supposed to ensure, this demilitarized zone was supposed to ensure that Germany could not sweep into France. Well, the Germans marched in with 100,000 barely armed troops, took the land, and guess what France and England did? Nothing. The Germans were not supposed to have a general staff, but they did, and guess what Germany and France did? Nothing. The Germans were not supposed to build an air force. So what they did was they built the Luftwaffe, their air force, and they called them mail planes. We're going to deliver mail with these. All they had to do was retrofit them with bombs. And what did the British and the French do? Again, nothing. They weren't supposed to have a draft, but Hitler brought the draft back. And the French and British were obligated to stop them from doing it. And what did they do? Nothing. There were all these steps that were happening. They took over Austria. And again, the British and the French did nothing. And Munich was the last place that they could have stopped the Germans without a huge war. The Czechs had the defense, the munitions and the defense positions in the mountains to repel a German invasion. With the help of the French and the British, they could have stopped it. But instead, they signed away the lives of innocent people. They signed away the liberty of another country. They put all of Europe in danger so that they didn't have to fight. That is what's going on now. Do you understand that the number one trading partner in the 1930s for England was Germany? Their economic trading partner was about money. And guess what the number one export from England to Germany was? Scrap metal. They just stamped it, return to sender, with U-boats and with airplanes and with bombs. And they were saying, oh, we're using all this scrap metal for peaceful purposes. Just like Iran is saying, we're going to use this nuclear program for peaceful purposes. Friends, none are as blind as the willfully blind. We'll be right back talking about what happened in 1981 that saved a lot of Americans from a nuclear bomb. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. It's just me and you having some coffee, talking about things. For example, talk amongst yourselves how the peaceful religion of Islam is neither peaceful nor a religion. Discuss. All right, June 7th, 1981. Events led up to it, and because of the decision of Israel to bomb the nuclear reactor in Iraq, Americans did not die from a nuclear bomb when we invaded Iraq 10 years later. I want to talk to you, again, giving you some philosophical and historical backdrop to what's going on, about the Augustinian theory of just war. It gives me a lot of pleasure to see one of the great saints and theologians of the church being referred to this very day with the just war theory. The just war theory is critical because in order to go to war, nations, at least just nations, want moral legitimacy for their actions. Okay? And so the just war theory has expanded and grown a little bit over time. Basically, the essence of it is a just defensive war, and then it got brought into have a just preemptive war. And what has people in a lot of consternation right now is whether or not there is even such a thing as a just preventive war. So again, going to 1981, the European nations, including America, we are not European, but including America, we had influence. There was this big discussion with Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi government as to whether or not they could have a nuclear reactor. And to make a long story short, the Europeans agreed to let Saddam Hussein have a nuclear reactor, just like we just did with Iran. Well, the Iraqis were hell-bent on creating nuclear bombs, and Israel was certain that they would use one of those weapons, or more than one of them, against the nation of Israel. When negotiations broke down with Israel and the European nations, and the European nations said, look, we're going to let them go forward, Israel said, we are not going to let them go forward. And so they put together a plan of attack, and they flew, they skirted, sometimes as close as 100 feet above the sand, with F-15s and F-16s, and they flew along the border in Saudi Arabia, just between Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and a one-way ticket was almost 1,000 miles. So this was very, very tricky. They couldn't stop anywhere and refuel, and they flew without being noticed all the way to Iraq, dropped their payload, and within a minute and 20 seconds, the reactor was destroyed. 10 years later, Cheney sent an autographed picture of the destroyed reactor taken from a satellite and thanked the head of the Israeli Air Force, saying, because of you and your actions, we had a much easier time of it in 1991. All right. Defensive war, preemptive war, preventive war. A defensive war, let's reduce this to you and somebody else fighting. Somebody comes up to you and punches you. At that point, almost all ethicists will agree that you have the right to self-defense, all right? Unless someone is a true pacifist and believes that they should never retaliate, then you're within your rights to defend yourself because you have been hit. That's a defensive war or a defensive strike. A preemptive war or preemptive strike is when somebody gets up in your face with their fists clenched and they say, I've had it. And they draw their fist back, and you've learned martial arts or something, and you give them a knee to the solar plex or the flat of your hand to their throat. You do something where you hit first. It's a preventive strike. The next one where it gets a little murky is what is called, that was a preemptive strike. Where it gets a little murky is what Israel did in 1991, a preventive war. We're going to launch a war to prevent a war. We're going to launch a strike to prevent a strike. Well, as it turns out, Israel was right. Israel was right. And I have a sneaking suspicion that they're right again. If we let the Iranians go forward, like the French and the British let the Germans go forward throughout the 30s, it will ensure that there is going to be war. So what matters today is that we play the role of Winston Churchill. I'll tell you about that role when we come back and illustrate how Cuba and Mexico and Iran are completely different animals. Cuba? No hablo español. ¿Qué pasa con este hombre? It is arguable that Winston Spencer Churchill was the towering figure of the 20th century, and clearly his leadership saved Western civilization from Nazism. Well, people say Winston Churchill's best speech was when he said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, sweat, and tears." That's not true. His best speeches, and perhaps his best speech, was when he condemned the Munich Agreement. Neville Chamberlain came back as a hero. Peace, we have peace. And Churchill said, no, he has ensured war. And Churchill had the guts to say it. And when all hell broke loose, Winston Churchill was the only British statesman that did not have his hands covered with blood, because he consistently warned people of the danger. And so then England turned to him and said, you lead us out of this mess, please. Well, what we have right now is the crisis that we wasted our silver bullet on the wrong nation. We fought Iraq. We invaded Iraq. The war always should have been against Iran. Iraq was never a threat. We could have launched a strike of retribution. We knew where Saddam Hussein lived. We could have just killed him, killed the leaders of the Taliban in Afghanistan, rather than gone on these nonsensical nation-building schemes. That aside, when you look at a nation, you have to address three things. Number one, their ideology, their means, and their history. Mexico, for example, has been riddled with communism for quite a while now. And so that's a bad ideology, right? But their history was not one where they were going to invade America, and certainly they didn't have the means. With Cuba, they had the ideology of communism, didn't have enough of a history, but they had perhaps the means with their alliance with the Soviets. So we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost led to war. We have successfully isolated Cuba and made them a non-threat to us. All right? Again, you look at the ideology of the nation, the means, and the history. When you look at Islamic nations, whether Shiite or Sunni, you see that they have the history, a nearly 1,400 bloody year history, where they will use the sword, the power of the military, to break the back of what they believe is paganism. Christians, Jews, other religions, they will sweep them away. They will force people to become Muslim. That's their history, okay? Their ideology is clear. They're following Muhammad, who said that Allah had placed in his hands the sword to ensure that none other but he be worshipped. And folks, if they have the means, as they have proven again and again, they'll use it. People forget that in the late 1700s and early 1800s, there were nearly 1 million white people enslaved in North Africa under the heel of Islam, because they had the ideology, they had the history, and they had the means to capture people and to enslave them. If we allow Iran to have the means, We know they have the history. We know they have the ideology. They're going to have the means, and they're going to use it. And we will be able to point to this disastrous decision led by Obama, which ensured the loss of life and treasure. I only have this to say. This man's got it right. And he might be the Winston Churchill that saves the world.